Our agenda this afternoon is to define student mastery, discuss possible district implementation, look at a preview of a mastery tracker, and discuss the specifics of a local implementation at Carrolton-Farmers Branch Independent School District. And finally, we will leave you with some things to consider. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Emily.
All right, good afternoon. We always like to start with a little bit of icebreaker to kind of understand our audience a little bit better. So go ahead and for me, rate your knowledge of the Mastery Tracker. You can again use that chat feature and you can give me feedback if you're a 0, a 1, or a 2, and be very open. We have some people give themselves a 1.5. You can just kind of rate yourself and let me know where our audience is today. That's just helpful as we get started. Yeah, 1.5, I like it. Right, we got a lot of you that are familiar, so that's good. You've heard of it. I didn't see a whole lot of zeros. So that's great because we're going to cover a lot of just general information so that you have some background. And then more importantly, we're going to hear primarily from Chris so that you can learn some things about how you may want to implement this in your school district, hopefully next year. All right, before you take that chat away, I am going to ask you one more question as I introduce and talk about mastery. I really like to get your wheels turning. So give me a little bit more feedback, and this really helps us as we guide the conversation today. So how do you define student mastery? So this is just you yourself, maybe not your district, but you yourself. Would you say it's a percentage that a student earns? Would you say that it's overall task completion and maybe being successful with task completion? Or would you say it's an overall view of student performance? So are you A, B, or C? How do you define mastery? All right, okay, my kind of people. I think it's unanimous. We have all C's. I very much like it. Okay, very good. You'd be surprised as I've traveled around the state of Texas and done similar presentations. Some places I go, districts will tell me that they have an exact percentage that defines student mastery for them. And that's always interesting and a great conversation to talk through. So this is always a good opening piece as you join efforts with your district to really learn how do you define mastery. We use that language pretty fluidly, but we may not always think the exact same thing when we're using that language. So it's nice to get on the same page. As we continue on, I provided some resources. So as an Eduphoria team, we came together and we answered that question as well. How as a company do we define mastery? Because we all wanted to be on the same page for a tool that we were pushing out together. And we wanted to make sure that we were all in agreement for what mastery looks like. So the two resources that I have attached here are two different articles that really help take us through the process of some discovery of how we define mastery. And so here are some of the discussion questions that are bulleted out that we went through. So this is just a potential resource for your district to have these conversations if you are really beginning to think that the mastery tracker is something that you may want to implement next school year or start having some early discussions around. Some other key components that always come up when you talk to teachers is what are we really using as evidence to determine mastery? And so in these conversations, it usually gets a little hairy and we start talking about things like grades. We also start talking about in-project work, writing samples. Every teacher will have something that they are a little bit tied to for determining mastery. And we really want to go back to what does Bloom's taxonomy say and what does depth of knowledge say? So for instruction and both the assessment side of mastery, we want to bring those together and help guide our conversation for defining mastery internally. So as I've been talking about it, is your district currently implementing the Mastery Tracker for data analysis practices? So are you implementing our tracker? Or are you implementing something else for Mastery as well? You can really answer me either way. Yes, we are. We're planning to begin either talking about Mastery or the Mastery Tracker, or no, we're not. And or is it something that you need to start talking about? So you can give me a 1, 2, 3, and a 4. Sorry, we've been really engaged. You're giving me some feedback right off the bat. Okay, I like it. Some of you, it's something you need to start talking about, or we have some no's, and that's why you're here. So that's great. Okay, I do see a couple of yeses. So that would be amazing. We would love to hear back from y'all your thoughts about implementing Mastery within your district as well. So as we start talking about district implementation, whether you were one of those that you said, yes, this is something we're doing, or you were one that said, this is something we're about to start talking about, let's really go into some of the details about district implementation. So when should you really start implementing the Mastery Tracker? And honestly, you can implement it whenever you want without some prior conversation, but usually these types of questions come up from teachers. So they will start asking, how do you define student mastery, which is what we kicked it off with. They'll also start asking about some of the labels that are within the system and what do those labels mean? And then we usually start talking about what types of assessments are we really wanting to look at for mastery to help to determine that? And finally, which groups of students are we really wanting to start monitoring? Because sometimes, actually all the time, the idea of monitoring all students can be very overwhelming. So by answering those questions, you really give yourself a solid foundation for implementation. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what the Mastery Tracker includes. So it does include student data analysis, and it includes year-to-year type of data. And the big piece is it contains teacher perception, which is where our tool is really housed. And so we really want to hear from that person who is in the classroom, what is their interpretation of student mastery? Because sometimes data can tell us one thing, but then what's actually happening within the classroom is something very different for various reasons. And some could even be test anxiety with students. So getting to hear from that classroom teacher is very, very important. All right, as we start discussing what types of assessment should be included, this is one of the really powerful pieces of the tool is you're able to go in and select test types within the system. So this is a great way to make sure that your test types within Aware really match up to your conversations that you're having with teachers so that they're not looking in the system and wondering which of these types has value for determining mastery. Because by simply selecting one category of a test type, that will bring in every single assessment into the tracker that falls under that test type. So it is very important to make sure that these line up with your conversations. All right, so guiding some of the setup process, and this really leans into what students are we selecting to track for mastery? And so with this, we designed the tracker itself so that it automatically pulls up monitor groups or access lists at the very top of the tracker when you are setting it up. So it automatically defaults, and those are above your individual classes when you log in and you're doing this as a teacher. This was very much intentional. We do not necessarily want a high school teacher pulling in over 150 students for multiple standards and tracking them over time. That could simply be very overwhelming just by definition. So we really want teachers to be intentionally guiding what students are going into the tracker. So as a good place to start, you could really start thinking about maybe through implementation, we just have teachers start tracking students who mastered the assessment last year. Because if you pause and think about it, the students who mastered the end of year assessments, we would then expect them to be mastering this year as they're moving through the course of the year. That would be our hope, right? And so those may be a great group of students to start with as you're looking into who's actually mastering the test. You could go the other direction and say, well, we actually would rather start with the students who haven't mastered for maybe consecutive years. And that would be also a great place to start, as long as it's not every single student that's on multiple different levels. So just thinking about it that way, that may give you some pointers of which groups of students we would like to start with very intentionally. All right, a key piece that we continue to talk about with Aware Premium is depth of knowledge. As you've heard us talk, depth of knowledge is embedded in every one of these new tools that we're providing, and with great rationale. It is also embedded into the Mastery Tracker. And so we provided a resource here that when you get a copy of this webinar, you'll be able to watch a previous webinar series that we did with Solution Tree around depth of knowledge and how you can start having these conversations in your district. If you haven't started these conversations, this may be a great place to start since it is already embedded within the Mastery Tracker. And as I mentioned, it's embedded in other places in Aware. So you may want to kick it off with some depth of knowledge conversations so that teachers are familiar with what this means and how it aligns to the assessment process. And I'll give you a good little example as I leave you with this little thought here. We're looking at a science standard that is 4th grade. It's 4.1b. And on the left, the standard asks you to describe and explain the water cycle. The question on the assessment that we use to assess students actually asks them to just identify one step of the water cycle. So as we look at that, does the question that I think we can all agree is really just a basic recall question on the right, does that align with the depth of knowledge of the actual standard that we're looking at? And I think we would easily lean in toward no, it does not. The student did not describe, nor did they explain any part of the water cycle. They simply identified stages within the water cycle. And so that's where a lot of confusion lies in data analysis. We assessed one way, but the standard is actually written and has expectations that are higher than what we asked on the initial assessment. So bringing this in is very, very much key to identifying students are mastering at a level 1, but they're not going to be prepared to answer a higher level question for this standard at the end of the school year. All right. I will give you a quick demonstration of the Mastery Tracker, just for some of those that were lower. You were a 0, you were a 1. We'll give you a brief overview, and then I'm going to hand it over to Chris to really talk about what this looked like in Carrolton-Farmers Branch. As we discussed this, if you're looking in the system and you don't see the little Mastery Tracker button with the trophy in your left-hand navigation, then that may be something that you want to contact sales about and reach out and learn more about upgrading to Aware Premium. So here's an example of a Mastery Tracker. The video is going to play. There are students that are selected on the left. And on the top, you will see the standards as they grow across the tracker. Each of those standards would be standards that have been assessed to date based on when the tracker has been set up. The 2 key data points that you see here represent the total raw score and the latest raw score. So in this example, we can see that one student got 3 out of 8 for the total raw score. Whereas on the latest raw score, they got 1 out of 3. So we purposely showcase this information to you so that you can see the holistic data for the school year, But you can also see if we had intervened with Emma during several times during the year, and on the most recent test, Emma had gotten 3 out of 3 on that standard, that would directly indicate to us that that intervention we are doing for that particular skill is working. And so even if she had struggled the majority of the school year, we can see that intervention has had an impact and affected her learning along the way, which is really one of the major purposes of identifying mastery. We know that mastery doesn't readily happen immediately. It happens over time for the majority of students. So when was that pivotal time that mastery occurred for this particular standard is what's being showcased here. You'll also see that everything that is blue is hyperlinked. So from this view, I can also click on an individual student's name. I can click on a standard. I can alter the standard types to look at readiness versus process. I can also make notes, which is what you will see happening here, that you can document that even though the student may be lower performing in this particular area, I've actually seen them do extremely well on remediation or in small group setting with me on this particular skill set. And so all of that can be noted within the software. And then really finally, there are an overall of 5 different views within this tracker. So that's part of the powerful piece is you don't feel the 5 different views, but they exist because they are just embedded within the tool. So the 5 different views that I'm referring to is you can see a class list of your students. You can see an individual student. You can view by standard. You can view by assessment, which is what we're seeing right here. And you can see an overall summary, which we really refer to as the mastery overview, and see your overall teacher report card individually and see what that looks like for raw score and percent score of standards over time. And on that particular test view is where you're seeing that depth of knowledge come in to give you that viewpoint of if we've only assessed at level 1 or have we gone all the way up to level 3 throughout the school year. So all of that information just lives within the mastery tracker for you to click really organically and discover all of these different areas. So that is just a quick overview of the mastery tracker. I'm going to pause and I'm going to hand it over to Chris to really talk to us more about what this looked like in Carrolton's Farmers Branch and what he's learned and what they discovered this past school year.
All right. Can you hear me okay, Emily?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, my name's Chris Julian. I am Director of School Improvement here in Carrolton-Farmers Branch, and was a teacher, campus administrator, and I'm just excited to share with you guys our journey and our path and some of the things that we learned this last semester. I will tell you up front, I come to you very humbly. We aren't necessarily we are rolling it out district wide this year, but as we were using Mastery Tracker, we really wanted to start with some small groups and figure out, where the sticky points were for our district. And I hope that I can share some of that learning and really expedite your processes as you seek to use the Mastery Tracker tool in your various districts. I put my email there for you. You're welcome to email and reach out, and also a link to our site, which is public and has some resources, and we'll continue to build those resources. So I just want to share a little bit about Carrolton Farmers Branch. We're a district of about 24,000 students. We have 24 elementary, 6 middle, and 4 traditional high schools, an early college, and 2 alternative campuses. We are kind of interesting in that within Carrolton Farmers Branch ISD, we actually live in we have students that come from 5 different cities in Addison, Carrollton, Dallas, Farmers Branch, and Irving. And we have 4 very distinct areas or communities. And I bring that up because we have a really broad variety of what students bring to school before they show up, in terms of resources at home, in terms of background knowledge, in terms of life experiences. And what that means is it's very important to know what our students have mastered, and what they understand even before the year starts and then throughout the year, right? To see how our teaching is affecting our students. And so whatever tool we use has to be one that's robust enough that we're not just looking at one test, but we have to take a really broad look across very, very high performing students to very, very low performing students as they come in. And this was our plan. In the spring, we did pilot use of Mastery Tracker at one elementary campus, one middle school, and one high school. Today, I'm only going to dig into one of the pilots at one of the middle schools, but really the potential is incredible with what we can do with this tool. I think it's going to be a lot like single test analysis was, where as the district contact, I didn't really do much training. I showed people where to click the button, and then they did it, right? And they got in and started using it, and they ended up teaching me along the way some of the best usages and strategies. And then all of our middle school math teachers created their own mastery tracker. I got to give a shout out here to LaDonna, who I saw was also on the call, who led a lot of that work with our middle school math teachers. And I will share with you some of the learning as we set those up as well. Now that we moved into summer, we are providing a mastery, or working with our campuses to create their own mastery trackers. We started really with meeting with each of our district leaders, and our structure, we have a content director, and then underneath each content director are instructional coaches, as well as our digital learning specialist. And we really utilize those people because they're the ones that are on campuses or on PLCs, and help the teachers through the process, especially with new implementations like this. And then our campus leaders will actually be the ones going out and integrating this, and we've put it into our new teacher orientation as well as our in-service training. Oh, and I should take the word training out, because I don't really believe in training. We don't train adults, but we do need to support them, right, by giving them the tools and the resources to make their job easier. This is the handout that we started handing out back in May after the pilots were over, just to make people aware of what the new tools are and what they can do with those tools. We plastered this everywhere. And as I said, I'm not going to dig into all the different ways like our elementary and high school, but I did want to share just a brief model of how one of our middle school, Polk Middle School, used Mastery Tracker in the fall. I think this example is really the tip of the iceberg. There is a lot more that you can do, but I did want to give a really practical example of how a team used Mastery Tracker in real world, in real time. And I have to give all the credit to LaDonna, who really met with the team, went in, made the videos, made sure that they were followed up with the teams throughout the process. So thank you, LaDonna, for all of your hard work. So at Polk, they do have an advisory period, and specifically we're going to look at how they use Mastery Tracker to support some advisory lessons in preparation for STAR. The advisory period is 33 minutes per day, so not a whole bunch of time. And each day is a different lesson, and Tuesday is the math lesson. So if you really do the math, we're talking about, over the spring semester, after you take out all the exceptions and the days off and all the other things that come up, maybe 6 to 10 lessons on each standard. And prior to this, the kids were grouped, but they were grouped by performance level. So approaches meets masters, and not necessarily by standard. I'm sure other districts have experienced this. We often are fairly easily able to group our students into ability levels, approaches meets masters. But that really doesn't tell you what they understand and what they don't. And really what we want to use Mastery Tracker for is so that every kid is in some type of intervention, but it's based on what their needs are, what standards they're still working on. So for this campus in September, the students were assigned to an advisory class, and that was again based on their overall performance. In January, all of those advisories were reorganized based on class performance and winter map. And then in February, we created the mastery trackers with the teachers, and the mastery was evaluated by each tracker and then shared with the students. From there, they work backwards because they have identified 4 essential standards identified for those advisory lessons. So using the mastery tracker, what are the essential standards that students were not mastering? And then based on how students performed, students were assigned to those groups based on the mastery of each of those essential standards. And then from March to April, they were grouped and went and did the different advisory lessons based on a specific standard that students were needing. The interventions could be anywhere from 2 sessions to 5 sessions total. We've got some tracking sheets here just to see, like over on the right, you can see one of the essential standards was 6.7a. Of course, the student names have been removed, but you can see one student had 0% on the most recent assessment and 0% across the year, whereas another student was at 75 and 83 across the year. So as we went through, it was very easy to basically say, okay, these are the kids that really need some more touches on this standard, and these are those that don't. Student who had not yet shown mastery of the standard got that small group targeted support, and then students who did show mastery of the standard were provided accelerated learning and progress learning because the students were already grouped. How it gets. You can't be moving advisory, every week. That can get really messy in a hurry. So the way that this was set up is the teacher was focused on the standard lesson here was for 6.4b. They would be working on that problem, and any student who had already shown mastery on Mastery Tracker of that standard would just be working on an accelerated lesson in progress learning. And this is an example of one of the problems that they worked through of 6.4b and 6.7a, which had 2 questions in that advisory period. We will skip this slide, but I do think this is going to be shared out. So this were just some words from a couple of the teachers who did this with their perspective and some of their advice on how Mastery Tracker was used.
And then, Chris, we did have a good question that came in about who has access to see the trackers. So I don't know if you want to talk about that and how that works in your district, or if you want me to just go ahead and answer that one.
I can definitely share, because that's a great question. We had kind of some interesting learning around that. The teacher creates that mastery tracker, and then but the administrator, the district can all see it. And in a district of our size, like one on the next slides, I'll kind of talk about this point, but naming conventions became very important for that reason, because we wanted to be able to find them. So we did spend more time talking about, and when I went around and did the training in the fall, I kind of showed them. I was like, we actually hadn't even rolled out the training, but it was just available in everyone's drop down. And I went in one day and we had 218 mastery trackers created. And that's not a problem for each individual teacher, but if you want to see that at a district level or a campus level, that was a bit of a challenge. And the solution was just to work with each of our teachers, just like, let's put your name, let's put your class, your content, your grade level, to make it a little bit easier. But also Eduphoria, they do make it quite a bit easier on the administrators, because in the administrator view, they only see teachers at their campus. They are sorted by grade level already. So um, it was pretty easy to kind of figure out how that worked. Did that answer that fully, Emily, or is there anything you need to add?
Yeah, that really did. They were really referring to who can see it, and Chris really did answer that. Anybody who is a campus administrator can see the trackers. So if you do have instructional coaches, make sure that they have a similar role as your principal and they're able to view that particular information. If you need to know the exact right that requires to be given to a person for them to be able to see the trackers, we're happy to put that information in the actual chat for you. But really, it's based on who has campus administrator roles within your district.
Yeah. And a little shout out, the custom roles really makes that a lot easier on us to be sure that everyone gets it. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, amen for
Uh,
that, right?
I think one of the biggest learnings, and actually I was looking at one today, and it happens when you first set the mastery tracker up, sometimes it just puts 3 dots as the data is populating. And especially, like, we were doing it in a room that didn't have the greatest internet access, especially when we had 30 people all hitting the same network at the same time. And then they would create it, and then nothing's populating, nothing pulled up. Or mine pulled up, but only half of the kids or half of the score. So that was one of our big learnings. And I think that was primarily our network. But just after you create it, if you see the 3 dots, tell people to just take a breath. It's okay. It will pop up. It does fully populate. It really depends on the size of the group that you have working on it simultaneously. But just know that there can be a delay. Our teachers, like I said, they found it very easy to access and immediately started their creating their own. So it did not take a lot for them to get in and start exploring around. Um, Emily asked the question earlier, like, where are you at? I would say we were at a number 4, right? We talk about mastery of standard a little bit, but we mainly talk about overall performance level. We do way more grouping and conversation about that, but we need to talk more about specific standards and track by specific standards, which this really does help us to do. And I would say another kind of learning for me through the process was that just because there's a better tool did not mean that our principals were ready for that tool. So I have an opportunity to get to work with a lot of instructional coaches, but also a lot of campus administrators and principals. And some of them have amazing tracking systems already in place. And just because Eduphoria rolled out a tool, they've been tracking mastery of standard across multiple assessments for years and asking their teachers to. Some of them in paper books, some of them in Google Sheets that they share. And I think that the end goal for us is for it's really just to see that we are tracking standards and that we are making sure that our students are mastering them. At the same time, I think we can ask our people to do more work than is necessary. We want our teachers teaching kids and supporting as much as possible. And if there are tools that make that work and getting to that work easier and faster, but I think you've got to, that was the approach that we took. I was pleasantly surprised by the response of quite a few of our administrators who I thought would be like, no, I'm not using that. I've got my own system that when they actually saw it and I showed them, they came back and said, I've been waiting for this for quite a while. Like they were pretty quick to switch over just because they saw what a time saver it could be for their teachers. Um, and the other one is the tool is only as good as the assessments. So when we've got a strong, robust bank of assessments, both formative and summative, that are aligned to standard and the DOK is identified, the tool works really, really well. But we did have a few teachers that went to set it up and they really didn't have enough assessments. Some of the questions were just created, but by themselves or by somebody. They weren't chosen from an item bank, so they weren't aligned to standard. And I do feel like this tool will really help us continue to improve our assessments because you kind of have to, right? Like for this tool to really work, you have to have a really good bank of assessments that are assessing by standard and assessing at the levels that are aligned to STAR. So it can lead to some conversations as you go through of well, we can't do this and I can't see this, but they can, right? So it helps to raise the bar for all of us, but just keep in mind that this all banks on having a really good, robust series of quality formative and summative assessments for this tool to really work. And that is all of my part. I hope that was helpful to you guys, and I will pass it back over.
Okay, we did include 2 other slides, which I think answer a couple of questions that popped up in the tracker. So that worked out, or popped up in our chat. Who can see the trackers has been a popular question. So again, we answer that with anybody who has the administration access. And here we actually gave you what that right looks like. So anybody that is on your campus that has analyzed test for that entire campus selected, then they're going to be able to view the trackers, and that's circled here. They would see my trackers and other trackers. So to refer to another question that was asked before is, what if we have instructional coaches and they don't readily have a rostered class list? Can they create a tracker, and or who could create a tracker? And that's easily answered by anyone who creates a student access list. So if you are a non-traditional teacher, you can go create an access list and have an administrator approve that for you, unless you already are an administrator. And then you could begin creating a tracker based off of those students that you are monitoring. And so this is a great practice. Honestly, this is what I would have done when I was an instructional coach in my prior district, is build some classes just like the teachers that I was working directly with, because how powerful would it be that I'm coaching a teacher and I'm going through and also marking mastery within the tracker, and we can cross compare our mastery analysis together and really say, why do you think that that standard is mastering? I actually put that that one was exceeded. Maybe you could have those valuable conversations as to how you arrived at the conclusions based on each of your trackers. And that's really the heart of coaching. And what we're really trying to get to is to be on the same path. So this really paves a great pathway for that conversation. And then last but really not least, very valuable, is this information is all tied to the student profile. And so after the school year ends, any student that a mastery tracker has been assigned to them will automatically tie to their profile. So this student's 5th grade teacher could come in and see all of the data collected for them for last year. If their prior teacher had made notes and put in those perceptions, they would also see all of that information. But honestly, even if a tracker is built with no notes and no perception, you still have extremely valuable information as the next grade level teacher, because you don't have to go run a whole bunch of reports. You can easily see how the student did last year, and all of that information will continue to tie to them over time. So those are important pieces, that all of your data is not in vain. It becomes part of that permanent record file for that student, for everybody to have access over time. I think those were some of the final key points that we were going to address today. I'll pause and see, Tara, did anything else come up in the chat or within Q&A?
Yes, we have one additional question on if the user gets a no assessments found message when they're building their tracker. Can you provide any troubleshooting for that case?
Yes, the one thing I would say to do is when you're looking, and I'll try not to make you a little seasick, but I'm going to go back to the slide that shows that so you can have a little bit of context. When you are setting up a planner and you get to the section where it asks you to select the actual types of tests, it's right here. A lot of times teachers will go in and write, in this particular screenshot, I selected campus and district level rubrics, which may not be super helpful, or district-based assessments. If I picked the wrong test type, then when I go into the very next screen, nothing will show up. It'll be blank. So choosing actually select all and selecting every single one of your test types may be the more beneficial route to be able to find those assessments moving forward, especially for, really refers back to what I was saying. If teachers don't know the test types that are important or that they are using at their district, then this could become a challenge. So selecting all of them benefits you so that you get all of those assessments, and nothing should come up blank in that case, unless you haven't given an assessment for the school year. All right, did we have anything else,
We
Tara?
have one additional clarification from the student profiles view. When the tracker is available from student profiles, does that include notes and perception or not?
Yes, it does. It includes all of the above. That's a great question. It is view only access to the tracker with that information for the student.
Can I jump in there really quick? Just on that perception piece, that was an interesting thing that came out of our initial pilots. Was we had quite a few teachers. Well, will that be populated automatically? And I thought it was a really nice conversation because, the answer is no, right? They will not populate the perception, because that the whole idea, right, is to put your perception in to look at it. And I used to subscribe to the theory when I would ask teachers or staff to transfer scores from one spreadsheet or one sheet to another. It's like, well, it's good for them to see it. But it's really not a good use of their time to transcribe numbers or percentages from a sheet to a sheet. But what is good is for them to look at the comparison and give a perception, right? That was really what we were trying to get at. And found that, like, our teachers, when we did that explanation, they were like, oh, perfect. Okay, I get it. Like, yeah, I see why it wouldn't be helpful to have that auto populated, but it would be better if I actually went through and looked at it, because that helps me understand, and it's a very quick process.
Yes, thank you for adding all of that, Chris. That is a great thing to consider, and a great thing that has been asked anytime I've been out working with teachers as well, about the perception. So just a great piece to have conversation about as far as what your district wants to implement. It is a powerful tool. I will readdress, even if you don't add perception. The power, though, is really put back in the teacher's hands when they're able to take ownership of that perception. So we did give that tool for that particular reason. Okay, we did have a couple of other questions come in, and if you would like to, we do have our online help support for using the Mastery Tracker, and you're welcome to reach out to support. This training, or this webinar, was really to reiterate what Chris is doing at Carrolton-Farmers Branch and how it's going. If your district would like training, you are welcome to reach out to us. We have that information in a slide Sorry, I'll go through to the very end. If it's something that you would like to have your teachers trained on the mastery tracker, it would be great time, especially right now, to reach out and set some of that up for the following school year. Oop, I went too far. There we go. And you can reach out to training@eduphoria.net if that's something that you want to put together for your teachers. We are selling a lot of training packages right now, and we would love to help support your staff on the foundation and the initial implementation of the mastery tracker within your district. Thank you so much, Chris, for being with us and supporting us and helping us to learn from you and what was beneficial at Carrolton-Farmers Branch. And we're so excited to hear more from you after year 2 of the mastery tracker.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we will, like we said in the chat, we will send out a link to the slide deck and a recording of the webinar following today.